Hi, everybody. Joe Maglitta, Senior Consultant for VentureBeat. We're talking today about the most common misconceptions of AI in business. If you Google that topic, you will find 15 or 20 pages of recent articles over the last couple of years. Apparently, there are a lot of misconceptions about AI in business. We're going to be talking today with Akhil Talwar, who's Senior Product Manager at LogMeIn. He's going to talk about what some of these misconceptions are, why they're true or not true, and take us into a practical realm about how we can deal with these and incorporate some of the findings into our day-to-day lives in business. So, Akhil, welcome. Very nice to meet you.
Thank you, Joe.
Just get us oriented here. What do you do at LogMeIn, and why is LogMeIn interested in this topic?
Great. Yeah. So my name is Akhil, as you introduced me. I'm a product leader for Bold360, which is one of the products at LogMeIn. And really, obviously LogMeIn as a company is something which a lot of people are familiar with, but Bold360 is really our focus on providing customer engagement, service and support platforms to enable brands to have a very rich experience with their end customers. And their end customers could actually be, external direct customers of theirs. It could also be employees of theirs within an organization. So how do you better engage with your own employees? How do you better engage with your customers? And then also thinking about the different moments in which organizations have conversations with their users. So it could be conversations around, someone who is an existing customer needs assistance. So it's almost like it could be a customer service or support scenario. It could be scenarios where you're trying to acquire new customers and you want to engage with them in an intelligent manner. And then thirdly is, how do you help your employees be more productive when they need to reach out for assistance, or as part of their day-to-day workforce, how are they kind of being more effective when they have any problems that encounter them to typically otherwise go tap the shoulder on some human being. So really what Bold360 does is it essentially combines a very awesome experience from a AI or a self-service standpoint, but also marries it very richly with a human agent-delivered experience. So where we started off our journey was primarily around providing a human-to-human assistance platform, where if you're a customer or an employee and you need assistance, you could reach out and get connected with some kind of an agent. And then over time, we realized that AI has really reached a point where there's actually really valuable use cases we can deploy it for also self-service. So helping, you think about situations, you may not always have 24/7 live agents available, but problems can occur every 365 days, 24/7, right? So that's when you can deploy AI to also help customer self-service. And increasingly, if you also look at some of the demographics of what we're seeing, people don't want to talk with another human being, right? In fact, I'd asked a bunch of students where I did a guest lecture a couple of months ago in college, and they none of them had ever contacted or called up a 1-800 number in the past year, and I was really shocked. And it's kind of insightful where these days people's first reaction is to either go to a Google or try to self-serve. Mm-hmm. And that's where we're seeing a lot of interest in leveraging AI in terms of customer service and support.
And so LogMeIn has an interest in this because it's going to become increasingly integral to your products, to the customer experience. And I imagine as people get more comfortable dealing with chatbots and dealing with automated services, it's going to be a more frictionless way to interact with any company and be able to create a connection that's not possible or not economically feasible for many companies to have something 24/7 all over the place. So there's a good business imperative here. So so that's the why we would want to do it. In the course of pursuing that, what are some of the most common misconceptions you see around AI? There are a whole list of them being put out there. People are defending it all over the place. In your world, in this context, what are you seeing?
Yeah, so I'll kind of boil it down to, I think there are 3 key misconceptions that I see. One is kind of like a meta misconception. I think first up, there's generally lack of understanding as to what AI really is. And that itself manifests itself in a lot of different ways. But, there is still, I feel like there is this hype cycle that we went through a couple of years ago where everyone was talking about AI as a buzzword. I think we've kind of moved past that phase. At least a lot of organizations who actually went in and looked at AI and started trying to apply it inside of their business practices, they've kind of progressed a little bit on a journey where they've gone past that hype cycle phase, and now they're really grappling with how AI can be useful for them. But I still think there's a large population of companies, and this is something that you can see in a lot of polls. Some organizations are still just don't know what AI really is all about, and for them there is a whole bunch of misconceptions. So one of them, of course, is that AI is a panacea for all their problems, right? So, a lot of executives I hear say, yeah, we've got all this data, we've got all these insights of years and years of having, engaged with our customers or business problems we've had. So we should be able to throw this at AI, and AI should be able to figure out patterns and solve our problems. Well, that's a pretty big misconception. I mean, if you put it in that type of a very broad context, it's going to be really hard to realize any immediate practical results in theory, right? So that's number one.
So the misconception there is that AI has magical powers, and if we sprinkle some here and there, it's going to take these oceans of data we have, suddenly make sense of it, suddenly push our stock up, push our quarterlies up immediately without really understanding what might go into that.
Right.
Again,
so
put words in your mouth, but
So I think exactly. So I think, as I mentioned earlier, there are some organizations who started that journey and now have gravitated to actual practical applications of AI. So I think there's that little bit of that, almost that chasm you got to cross, where you're thinking about AI versus you've already started that journey. And once you start that journey, then it becomes a lot more tangible as to what are some of those problems you can start solving and tackling with AI. So I think that itself, that making that transition is not easy for all organizations, and that causes a lot of misconceptions. The other big thing that also I see come up in a very big way is this misconception around AI is going to steal away our jobs. And I think that one is really critical because it really impacts the way executives can think about this in a very logical manner, because it'll just cause a lot of resistance towards even like considering and getting further into evaluating AI-based solutions. So I think those are some of the main misconceptions. Getting a real fundamental alignment on what AI is. Like, some organizations think automation and AI are the same thing. They're not. Right? So that's one misconception. The other thing, of course, is really understanding that AI is not here to steal away our jobs. And then thirdly, really realizing that, AI is actually got a lot of different applications, but it can't really just give it data and it'll just find all your solutions.
So when you sit down with somebody at Thanksgiving dinner or whatever dinner you're having, and explain to a person who might not be completely up to date about what AI is, what is your working definition of what AI is and what it can do, if that's one of the first big misconceptions? How do you explain that to people?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And what I typically try to describe to them is, I try to explain to them through some examples, right? So if you picked an example that, hey, if you're leaving your home and you want to set your Nest thermostat to fire at a particular temperature every single day, so maybe it's not consuming as much energy or it's coming back on at a certain time later in the day, that is automation. Right now, Nest also has some AI elements, but the purely like setting some kind of a schedule or recognizing if temperatures cross a certain threshold, then you cut off the air conditioner, or vice versa. That is automation. So that's where you're doing rules-based, very explicit definition of if this happens, then do this. And there are variations where it can get more complex. That is not AI. Where AI comes into play is where the Nest starts to understand your pattern automatically, and it starts learning based on behavior versus having you explicitly define a set schedule. Or think about AI as that curated recommendation list that shows up on your Amazon list based on your shopping pattern. It's not something that you explicitly said that, hey, I want this and this to appear in my wish list, but it started to kind of appear in things that you may want to purchase and buy. So that's one big difference I like to explain as something where AI, and getting into probably a more academic definition, is where AI is more about not having to specify specific rules and coding it in that way, but being able to infer just like the way humans learn through experiences and through data. So that's, I think, the crux of the difference between what we would call as automation and AI.
And what do you tell organizations that are still maybe at the magic dust theory? If we add AI to our data lakes and the pools that we have out there, that's going to immediately lead to business impact. I mean, how do you begin to talk to them to break down that misconception that it's more than sprinkling magic dust, that there's a systematic implementation that needs to take place?
Yeah, so I think the first step there is really helping them get past this hype cycle and misconceptions of what AI is, and really working in from a different angle as to what are some of the business problems that they're struggling with. And there are certain immediate applications of AI that we can lead with and kind of present them to be a little more directional, that help shape the conversation with them. So for example, in our space, we're in the customer service and support landscape. AI is beneficial in a lot of different ways. One of the things is, there have been a lot of advances in natural language processing. What that means is we can understand when our customers ask us questions a lot better than we could in the past. So that's a very interesting application. Starting with that one use case, you can now derive a lot of different scenarios. So one is, could we use that technology to better route when a customer comes, and route them to the right agent? Can we use that to, instead of routing them to agent, maybe route them to an answer or a response if we know what they're really asking us about? And then thinking about other side of efficiencies, how can we realize, contact centers are really operating on razor thin margins, right? They're always viewed in a lot of cases as a cost center. How can we help them make their agents more productive? So if there's something that an agent is doing very repetitively, can we use AI to learn some of those signals? Again, it's learning, it's not hard-coded rules. And then being able to serve up those insights and actually act upon them in an intelligent way. So I think those are ways by which we can help, steer the conversation into getting into those most practical use cases versus just operating at a very stratospheric level. And then the other thing, of course, is helping them dispel some of these misconceptions that is going to steal away jobs. We've worked with a lot of customers where AI is working hand in hand with their human workforce, making them more productive, right? So where, coming back to my earlier point, where some organizations have viewed their contact centers as a cost center, they've actually become profit centers now, because they've been able to shift a lot of the repetitive, mundane work over to AI, and now their agents are focused on the more high value, or maybe the high emotional, maybe churn moments where they want to really, salvage a customer experience, or maybe shift more of their agents into maybe customer acquisition and helping, drive more business top line growth. So it really presents a good canvas for a conversation as we start talking about a lot of these different possibilities with AI, and really then tying them back to business problems that they might be having.
So the popular fear among people who might not be as involved with this is that AI will take jobs. But do you get the other misconception within businesses who look at a realistic implementation of AI along the lines you're describing and thinking, hey, this is great, I can actually reduce headcount? Is a misconception that this can be used from a business's point of view in a more positive way to reduce headcount more immediately. So not so much from the employee perspective, but from the company perspective.
Yeah, so I mean, I think from a company perspective, they're looking at cost efficiencies, but at the end of the day, human capital is pretty prime, and organizations are all about capital deployment, right? How are they going to leverage their assets in the best possible way? So when they are looking at it, they're looking at it from a cost efficiency or scale standpoint. So with the same resources, how can we grow even faster or bigger? How can we deploy those human agents? And what we're seeing, I mean, I give this analogy, right? When the banks, when they introduced ATMs, we didn't get rid of the tellers. Now those people have repurposed their role into now doing things like financial planning and consultation. So again, like there's going to be a repurposing of the contact center and the classic traditional frontline agent in a lot of ways, as they now gravitate towards becoming maybe content curators, or also in the cases handling like more of the high touch, high value type of engagements. So I see it more as a reallocation than it is a getting rid of jobs, if you think. But there are cost efficiencies to be realized in the process.
And so, thinking again about the practical overcoming of these kinds of misconceptions, what are some of the business risks that accompany a company that might have these misconceptions? And what are the dangers here? What are the risks? And what are some of the potential missteps that they might take if they're working from some of these misconceptions?
Yeah. So tying back to those misconceptions, right? So if you don't have a very clear understanding of what AI really is, it's very hard for you to get to defining practical applications and really taking that step into the direction that I mentioned that some organizations already have taken. So I think you'll really struggle to get to that first phase. So I think that's one big risk involved over there. The other big risk is around, if you can't really get past this AI is here to steal our jobs, let's run away from it, that kind of fear mongering, you'll never get buy-in from the people who actually are needed, right? You can't really bring in any technology inside of an organization. It takes people, process, and technology, and you need that trifecta. So I think it's really crucial that, if these are not addressed, then it does introduce a problem as to how do you kind of take it past and bring it into your frontline employees. And then I think the other big thing is it also helps then define like what kind of resources and skill sets you need. So you need executive buy-in. Absolutely. You need to get clarity on, the use cases that you're going to go after. So you're not setting yourself up for failure, right? So if you get past those initial objections and those initial concerns and you move towards, these are some specific goals we're going to accomplish with AI, you can then establish the metrics to actually see how you're doing against those goals, and also hire the right set of resources and people needed for it. One of the things that I think part of the misconception that also can lead to it is people think of AI as this, experimental sandbox, and there are a lot of good do-it-yourself AI platforms today. Google has got great ones, IBM, and and the likes. What I would highly encourage is, while you can do some exploration there are also another whole class of applications that are more up the stack, if you will, in terms of AI. It's not as bare bones where you're working with things like APIs and going and trying to solve fundamental problems. There are a lot of prepackaged applications that can really be deployed towards specific business problems. So you want to look at this a little more holistically, rather than I need to go in, hire a bunch of data scientists and they're going to have to do a lot of fundamental research. I think that's where a lot of people also make a ton of missteps, and then they realize they spend a bunch of resources, weren't very clear as to what those objectives for those data science or research teams would be, and then realize ROI is basically becomes a pipe dream for them. So I think those are some of the things that you definitely want to avoid in terms of some of the risks of those missteps.
So as a final bit of practical advice, what should enterprises and organizations be looking at when they're considering implementing and measuring AI?
Great question. So I think one of the big things is that organizations spend an inordinate amount of effort on the first phase of actually like developing something, and they run out of steam or run out of resources in actually the measurement and actually being able to track the success phase of it. And this goes back to some of those I think of it like there are more fundamental AI platforms where you get a core set of capabilities, but all the surrounding analytics, all the surrounding data that you need to actually measure the success is not part of it. So you're kind of, it's something that you may not end up developing, as opposed to more purpose-built solutions where you're providing not just the AI layer, but also the analytics and the measurement components of it that tell you how successful or unsuccessful it is. For example, in our world, when people look at chatbots, one of the metrics is they look at a fulfillment rate. How successful was a bot in terms of answering a customer's question? What was that customer's experience, whether it was NPS or CSAT, look like? And that's all pre-built as part of it, end to end. So being able to measure that self-service outcome and quantify it very tangibly. So I think that's really important, to be able to have those kinds of tools that let you get that holistic view of the success of it. as opposed to really just trying to solve something very fundamentally from an experimental way, but really not focused at the latter half of some of those projects on how you're going to measure and look at it. And the other big thing is like businesses constantly change, so you may develop something, but if you don't have a good way of insights into how it's performing, you won't really know where to invest in next. And I think that's important, that from a data standpoint, you really define the key cross-functional stakeholders that should be able to view all of those outcomes of those different projects that you're doing in real time, to be able to see how it's touching. Maybe your marketing team would like to know how your customers are engaging with your brand. It's going to maybe inform your service and support strategy in a different way. So I think there are a lot of different ways by which we need to expose that to a broader cross-functional group, taking it outside of just those siloed data science teams.
Outstanding. Akhil Talwar, saying your product manager, LogMeIn. Thank you. Pleasure chatting
Great.
with you today.
Thanks so much, Joe. Thanks.